1X Developer Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back.
Welcome back. This is Brendan.
And I'm Colin, and I just figured out how to use my webcam. How good I look.
It's awesome, man.
In frame and everything. Well, this is called the 1X Developer Podcast. That is what this show is that you clicked on. And today we're going to talk about software like and computers and your expectations versus reality. Like, basically what it is there's, I always have this phrase that comes up really when I'm working on anything where I say like, there's the way you're supposed to do something, and then there's like the way you do it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. This comes up with like anything. I mean, there's all kinds of like safety stuff and like a right way to do things with like home improvement and stuff. And then there's the way you kind of just do it because it's what works. Right.
Yeah.
And I think we do that a lot in software.
Do you turn off the breaker when you do electrical work at your house?
I do, actually.
I do too.
Okay.
I think you should. I think that's one where you really are supposed to.
Oh, I've had electricians come over and they don't. And I'm like, I hope you know like what you're doing. I mean, I guess that makes sense. I think maybe I haven't turned it off when I just like was just looking at, like I was just taking the plate off of a switch to see what was in there, but like I'm not going to move stuff.
That one almost seems like, people who've done it 100 times. I know there are people who, just don't flip the breaker. They just kind of go at it and they feel comfortable doing that. I am not one of those people.
I'm trying to think of what's another one. I feel like this is something that there's tons and tons of examples, right? But I didn't come up with any before we started recording.
Well, yeah, I think almost every home improvement project has like the right way and then the I don't know, the normal way. I think, but part of it with home improvement stuff is like there are building codes and stuff like that. I don't research building codes before I make a change in my house. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Someone would have to tell me, oh, that's not up to code for me to even consider that. I just watched some YouTube video, and if the guy didn't die when he was doing it, then it's probably fine.
Yeah, and I think less with safety. Really, it's like I don't know. Like I stained my deck a couple of years ago, and like everybody was like, "Yeah, you need to wash it, you need to prime it, you need to like scrape everything, you need to figure out what kind of stain was on there previously, so you can buy the right kind again." I mean, I had people power wash it, and then I just stained it. It looks fine.
Yeah. I think that's the other thing is a lot of it has to do with, I don't know, like the quality of the results and like how long it's going to last and all that kind of stuff. I think some people are really, really interested in getting like maximum. They want that deck stain to last for 5 years or something. You know what I mean? And
yeah,
I don't know. I tend to do exactly what you did. Last time I stained my deck, I just washed and stained.
It's probably like cars. I feel like people do this with cars. There's like you're supposed to check your tire pressure like every third time you fill up or something. Like when's the last time you checked your tire pressure?
Honestly, I have issues with my tires. I end up checking my tire pressure all the time. But it's because the little light on my car comes on and says like, "Hey."
Well, that's the thing too. Yeah, most cars now they tell you if you're low. Same thing with the oil. They have they'll tell you if the oil's low. Okay, but the way this correlates to being a 1X developer is specifically really with just like this idea you have when you start programming, right? When you're in college or even just learning, you have this idea that like you're going to start a project and you're going to make all these choices and you're going to build this thing from scratch. But that's very rarely what we're doing on the job. At least if you're doing like a, you know, a day-to-day full-time 401k or not 4,
40
W2
hours.
type position. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I don't think it's just college. I think, yeah, I think a lot of someone who's learned on the internet from tutorials and stuff like that will kind of have the same experience, but it's just this idea of like, you get to decide what the framework is. A big part of it is that when you start the project, you get to pull in all the like the fresh dependencies. You know, we've talked before on this show about how much time you spend like updating node dependencies and stuff like that. And it's just like, well, it's all fun and games and it's all super easy when you start fresh because everything is new and everything works together and all that. It gets much more complicated later on when some things are out of date and this only works with that version of node and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's weird. Like, I think that learning how to work on like real long-lived projects is something that you just have to learn just from doing it, you know? I don't know if it's something you can really be prepared for.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think it's really, really hard to do that especially on your own. I think it's really hard to do that. But even in a classroom setting, I think it's really hard for a professor to be like, I've set up this trash legacy project for you to work on. It's got all kinds of like terrible dependencies and some of the stuff isn't supported anymore. And you're going to have to dig through the documentation. Versions are out of date. It's like, I understand why a professor wouldn't want you learning on an environment like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like I forgot what I was gonna say.
So how do you learn? Like, do you remember going through a process in your, I don't know, your working career where you, I don't know, was there some kind of process that you went through where you were just like, okay, I get it now. Like, not everything is like I learned it was going to be. We have kind of a different way that we work when things are in the real world, or however you want to say it.
Yeah, I don't remember having like a moment really, but I think back at some of the things, like I remember pretty quickly, like for my first time working in real projects, realizing like, oh yeah, some people just don't write comments on every single line of code.
Yeah.
That's not something people do. And really, it's not even something they should do.
Yep. Yeah, I don't remember having anything like that either. I don't remember going through that like realization, but I think when I got a job doing it, I was kind of just like happy to be employed as a programmer, and I was like, I don't know, guess this is how it is now. Uh, you just kind of
Yeah,
you got to roll with the punches a little bit, I guess.
yeah, absolutely. I was gonna say I've done like interviews where they've tried to kind of replicate that type of situation where they said like, here's a project, here's a bug, fix it, and that kind of thing, which I think is actually really cool. I think that's a lot that translates well to what you'll actually do on a job or than
Absolutely.
some other types of interview questions.
How much, so in a coding interview like that, how much code did they give you? Like, how much was it to wade through?
Um, it wasn't much. I don't really remember, but it wasn't. It really wasn't much. And I don't remember if it was even like a whole project really, but it was very small. And I remember I found it like pretty quickly because it was like it was a React project, and I don't remember what the bug was, but it was just like a just classic React bug, like some use effect wasn't triggering or something, like something. If you've done React coding, like you've seen this one.
Mm.
Um, So yeah, but I mean that's a whole other topic, like interview questions and how do they translate to the real world and real jobs and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of times they're kind of in the same boat of, I think a lot of that leak code stuff kind of assumes that, right? Let's say that you have the perfect environment and everything is set up correctly. Like, how do you write this sort algorithm or whatever? You don't have to deal with the constraints of maybe a legacy system.
Yeah, and I've been thinking lately, like so many of the problems that I deal with really aren't even like strictly speaking programming. It's more like something's configured wrong on the server, or there's just some unexpected use, or so, like very, very few problems are really just like, oh yeah, this code is wrong.
Yeah. Almost everything that I do on a daily basis has to do with users using the program in a way that we didn't expect.
Wrong, incorrectly.
I don't want to say you're
Using
wrong
it
for doing
wrong.
it this way, but you're wrong. Yeah, it just has to do with some kind of use case that we didn't anticipate, or the data set was much bigger than the resulting thing is much bigger than we anticipated it being, or something like that. Yeah. I feel like same for me. Very few of them are just like, I don't know, I forgot a semicolon or whatever.
Right. It's so interesting whenever you're working on a side project and you do get to make something from scratch and you start it like from the beginning. It's such a like kind of like honestly bizarre experience, but such a like clean feeling, like wow, I'm just starting over.
I love it so much. I love starting a brand new project. It feels so good, man.
It's amazing how quickly it starts to suck too.
Yeah, I know. That's one of the things that I wonder if I really honestly wonder if there are ways to avoid that, or if it's just inevitable, because you're 100% right. It starts to suck very quickly. You come back within like 2 months or something, you're going to come back to your project and be like, oh man, like things are already falling apart on me. This is already going sideways.
Yeah. And I guess that's what they're trying to teach you in school when they have you start a new project, I guess. Right. They want you to instill in you these ideas of how to build something so that it doesn't suck later.
Yeah. I don't really think there's anything wrong with teaching someone that way. I think you have to I really think you have to, I mean, you got to start somewhere, and you got to, before you can learn about like principles of software architecture or whatever, you really have to learn the basics, syntax, and all that kind of stuff. And I think that you have to, it only makes sense to like start with a fresh project to learn that kind of stuff. This is how it's supposed to look. It might not be what you're going to encounter in the real world, but this is the kind of like clean new thing that you're trying to get to, right?
Yeah.
I think it's an okay way to teach. But I think that, I don't know, maybe people could do a better job in school of preparing you for this idea that the projects you encounter in the real world are not going to look like this. They're not going to, everything's not going to fit together nicely. Everything's not going to be nicely engineered. Even if things are nicely engineered and you have everything set up and well commented, it's still going to take you a while to dig through some of these, like, I guess the concepts of the legacy code. We did it this way back in 1999 because we only had access to something, and that it's just like stuck around ever since. I mean, that's just a real thing that happens, and a lot of times it just doesn't make business sense to go back and fix those kind of things,
Yeah, it really does. And there's always kind of that give and take, because like the technical debt just grows and grows, and there really never is, at least it's a hard sell, right, to convince someone that there's a business reason to go back and rewrite something that works.
Yep.
Because what you're talking about is just like future hours worked, really.
And I think it's really hard to guarantee from a business perspective that, okay, so if we spend 2 months on this project, refactoring this thing and like making the developers happy, is it really going to save time down the road? I think in a lot of times the answer is I think the answer is yes, but probably not as much time as we think.
Well, and so I mean that's a whole other kind of issue. Maybe we could kind of pivot the discussion into, which is like, I mean, you can never guarantee anything, right? And like estimating work is like so impossible that like I've seen a lot of people online say like, why do we even do this? Like why do we story points to stuff? Like, because we're so often wrong. None of us really knows how long anything's going to take. And I've always just like, I don't even know how to ask this question, but I've always wanted to know, like, okay, how do I know what I'm going to do before I do it? Right? Like, how do I know how hard something's going to be to do before I start on it?
Yeah.
In software specifically.
Right. Even just finding out what you have to do to fix the problem is, I mean, that's a task in and of itself. And it's a task that is extremely hard to estimate. I mean, what do you, are you asked to do that often at work? That people ask you, like, how long is this bug going to take?
Yeah, we give an estimate. I think your team is kind of unique. Or at least the team that I worked on with you was kind of unique in that we didn't do that. Most of the places I've worked at, we have to either assign story points or at least give like a t-shirt size, right? Small, medium, large, which I think is a bit more reasonable. That's something I think you should be able to do.
Mm-hmm.
But every team does it differently. Like, so this is something that has always bugged me. Like, so I worked on a team where I've worked on teams where we assign story points based on how long we think something will take, which I think is kind of the more direct, like obvious way that things would work, right? Like, so it's just like, okay, say 3 story points correlates to about 1 week of work. I worked on a team before where it didn't work that way. It was based on complexity. So not necessarily how long it would take you to do, but just how complex the task is, right? So the idea being like, updating a bunch of stuff, changing a bunch of text could take a long time to do, but it's a low complexity, right? Like there's not really much that you have to like figure out in order to do it. And that was how we estimated stories. And it was, the idea was that we do it that way because not everyone works at the same speed. So estimating based on time doesn't make sense, right? If the ticket hasn't been assigned yet, right? Like the story points should just be the complexity so that we can gauge how much complexity we're adding to the project. And like as I explain it, it's just, I feel like it sounds so insane because it is. And like, so I was like the member of the team that was always like, look, I don't get this. This doesn't make sense to me. Like, and then we would just go in circles where they would try to explain it, and they would use all the same words that I was using to explain it, and it just never clicked with me.
That seems a little crazy to me.
Yeah. Well, and so I mean, so we would have meetings where we would do the Planet Poker thing, where we would like vote on how many story points each ticket would have.
Okay.
And it would be a nightmare because everyone would have different ideas, because how do you explain complexity? How do you what is one complexity? What is that for me versus for you? Like,
right.
it was nonsense. The thing that really killed me though was just that. I mean, the point, the general idea of estimating is so that you can plan, right? You can make a plan, a time-based plan. So the story points aren't tied to time, but the purpose of them is to measure time.
Yes.
To do right. So it was, I don't know.
No, that was exactly my initial question when you were explaining that, was like, if it wasn't for the project manager, or if it wasn't for project planning in general, we wouldn't be estimating anything. It's only so that we kind of know like what's in the pipeline, how long is it before we can get this some feature that someone requests, something like that. It seems crazy to not base it on time, because otherwise, yeah, I really don't know what estimating the complexity that we're adding in the system, what does that get you at the end of the day,
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and that kind of goes into, kind of bleeds into the idea of just like what do a lot of these like agile ceremonies get us really.
Mm.
Because that's another thing. It's an expensive meeting. The whole engineering team would be in these meetings for like 2 hours. Like
Oh, wow.
that's an expensive meeting. That you know, if you're gonna have a meeting like that every 2 weeks, it better be valuable.
Yeah. Did other members of the team like it? Did they like rating things by complexity?
I felt like I was always battling uphill, but eventually we did stop doing those meetings. Uh, I don't really know. So that's another thing. It seems like people will just a lot of times people will just kind of go with something because it's something that's what we do. Um, but anyway, but I mean, there are times where estimating on time. I mean, like we were saying, it's just estimating in general is just so hard and sometimes basically impossible. But
Yeah.
giving a time-based estimate can seem silly too sometimes. I mean, it's going to take me as long as it takes to do. I think the most important thing really is just the priority, right? Like,
Yep.
is this ticket a high priority for our users or not? I think that's the main thing that should make a difference.
Right. Do I need to interrupt what I'm doing? Any other things that I'm working on to work on this instead? Do you feel like you've gotten better at estimating?
I think I have. And another thing I'll say is like, I think it's very project dependent. I mean that in the sense of like, it's really hard to make an estimate in a project that you're new to.
Yeah.
Unless if it's something you've worked in a while, it's a lot easier to make an estimate, regardless of how much experience you have.
That's very true. That's kind of what I was trying to say with earlier about like learning the concepts of a project, even whether it's a legacy system or not, it's like you kind of have to get familiar with just the the basic building blocks of the system that are kind of like used throughout it and stuff like that. If it's I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good example, but if it's a graphics system, you kind of have to like know about their drawing algorithms and stuff like that. Otherwise, you kind of, it's much harder if you have to learn all that stuff from scratch, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. I was curious, do you have any examples of like things that you do in a project that you know you shouldn't? You're like, yeah, this is not the textbook way to do this, but like I'm doing it.
Gonna out myself here.
Like something that comes to mind for me, for example, is just like commit messages, just in general, right? Like there's articles written about like how they're supposed to be formatted, how they're supposed to be good, and what they're supposed to be like. And yeah, there's times where I'm like, work. I mean, no, not literally that, but just all right. Let's put something in there. Like, refactored some function. The end. Whatever.
For some reason, I try to be really good about my commit messages. That's not one for me. I think the biggest ones for me are when the project or the like the chunk of code that I'm working on is written in a certain way, in a certain style, and I want to kind of like keep with that. You know, I know we've talked on the show before about like, you know, you're writing code that's kind of like in the style of the stuff around it, because it's just a terrible experience when you come to a chunk of code and it's written in like some of it is just old JavaScript and some of it's new JavaScript, and it's like that kind of thing. So sometimes I will write suboptimal or like kind of old style code in order to fit in with the surrounding code, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Um,
I've done that.
you know, I think the right thing to do there is to rewrite the entire chunk in the new style and the better style. But, you know, that's one of those things, expectations versus reality. You don't always have time to, that estimate that you gave, it doesn't always include rewriting the entire submodule or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that would be I mean, that's the right thing to do long term, but that, like, I would argue that for the ticket you're working on, for the project that's like for the work that's been scoped, it makes sense to just do it how it's been, and then make a ticket for later updating the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll buy that. That should be its own, that rewriting a big chunk of code should be its own ticket. I don't know, man. I can't think of a good one that where I do something wrong and I know it's wrong to save time. I'd have to think about that. I'm sure I've done it, but I really try not to.
Yeah, I mean, that you should. Another thing I think, just on this, continuing on this topic of like kind of your expectations versus reality, and this has been talked about a lot, but I think a lot of people are really surprised at how little time is spent like at the computer programming for a typical developer.
Yeah. Yep. I remember in our Matt Watson interview when he was asking you like, how many lines of code do you think you write in a day? And you were like, 100. He's like,
100, yeah.
he's like, it's like 20.
Yeah.
I think about that a lot because he's 100% right. It's like, yeah, when you average it out, you know, there are good days and bad days, but like, yeah, just the number of lines written, the amount of code is much less than I would have expected it when I was younger. And I was like, I want to get a job in programming. You just don't write as much code as you would expect. There's just all kinds of other stuff you do.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff you do, and also like, I mean, it's pretty rare to like have a day where you are coding for 8 hours, actually coding for 8 hours. And I don't know, like, I don't think very many people could even do that. I mean, we were talking about our Ghost developers last week who have, what was it, 3 commits in a month or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the other end of the spectrum.
I think that's right. I think 8 hours a day of coding is difficult to manage, at least in the long term. Like maybe I think you can cram for a week or so doing that. But yeah, I think 8 hours of straight coding is a lot to ask of a person just in terms of mental energy. I know in deep work, Cal Newport talks about, you know, the kind of the upper limit for most people in terms of like real focus is something like 3 or 4 hours. It's a lot less than 8 hours. And I think when we get into knowledge work jobs in general, and maybe programming specifically, that seems like kind of the upper limit for how much you can really concentrate on writing code in a day. That seems reasonable.
Yeah.
Which is not to say that you're not, I mean, there's lots of work that is not coding, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Something just popped in my head. I had a friend who was saying like, someone he's not a developer. He was saying like, isn't it just so hard to like keep up with everything as a programmer? Like you got to like keep up with all this stuff. And in a sense, yeah. But I kind of got the feeling that he imagined that like as a developer, you just have to like know every programming language and like keep up with every single one and know every new paradigm that comes out and be familiar with every framework that comes out. When really the average developer, they keep up with like their stuff. You know, Java developers keep up with like the new version of Gradle and whatever. And maybe not even that, you know, like, but like
Yeah.
a lot of like professional software developers, they don't even know about the stuff that you're talking about on Twitter right now. They haven't heard of Zig. They don't know what they don't even know about like the new AI tools. They couldn't name them, you know. Uh, so I think there's definitely a dichotomy there between expectations and reality.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that he just thought part of being a programmer is just kind of knowing about all of the stuff that's going on in programming. It's just too big, man. There's too much. There is too much going on. I think that a lot of programmers could do a better job about like kind of being aware of what's hot and just like where the trends are going. But at the same time, I think it's totally unrealistic and totally crazy to expect an average programmer to kind of like be up to date on all the little corners of programming that are going on. It's just these days, it's just such an enormous.
That's impossible. I would say it's literally impossible.
Yeah, I think so. There's just too many sub cultures and things going on in the software development world that seems like a crazy expectation to me.
But I agree that it devs who just like seem to just not be plugged in at all, that's kind of weird to me. Like and you know, there's things you haven't heard of, like that's fine, but I feel like I've heard stories about people who are like, yeah, or like I've seen this on Twitter. People say like, I was talking to this guy, he's like an engineer at Meta, and he had no idea what Claude or ChatGPT was or something like that. And it's like, well, how? You know, like what? Just how?
Yeah. I wonder how you kind of like get into that silo so deep that you don't need anything. You don't need kind of any news from the outside world to do your job. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. But I don't know. In some ways, it's like I'm almost jealous. Not really so much with software, but just like, you know, people who aren't plugged in and like don't read the news. I'm like, that sounds like a cool life in a way.
Man, I used to have that life, and I think I was better off for it. I think my life got worse when I started paying attention to the news.
Yeah.
But in terms of software, one of the things I've really liked about doing this podcast lately is like I feel more plugged in. I do a little more research on new stuff. We've tried, you know, a few things. Like I've been learning NeoVim. It's like something I've wanted to do for years. I like being plugged into that stuff as long as it's not. I think that's very different than being plugged into like the constant churn of the news. Every day it's something,
Right.
You know what I mean? It's but just evaluating technologies and being like, well, could this help me in my day job, in my side projects, whatever it is. You know, you kind of I think sometimes you forget that you got into this stuff because you like doing it and it was fun.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could do more of that. It's so hard just harder and harder to find time to dig into something that may not matter for your job or turn into anything.
Yeah,
but that's like where the magic happens.
That's where the magic happens. That's what makes programming fun. I think that feeling, even if it's, you know, so going back to the beginning of the episode, talking about these like greenfield projects and just starting fresh and all that, like if that's all you do, I don't think that's good, but there is something kind of like magical about doing that. And it's doing that kind of thing, just going through a tutorial with a new technology and kind of like seeing how the pieces fit together. That really does remind me of like, oh yeah, this is why this stuff is fun. Like things are supposed to fit together perfectly and all that kind of stuff.
100%. Do you have anything else, or you want to hop into whose side are you on?
No, I think that's it for me. I'm not sure where we landed with this. I kind of like, on one hand, I think learning with greenfield projects and stuff like that is the right way to go. But I think that you just have to have some kind of knowledge that in the real world, it's not like that. It's messy and gross, and nobody wants to do it, but every project gets out of control and unmanageable, and it's your job to tame the chaos.
I think that's a pretty good summary. This episode is a little bit more off the cuff, but I think sometimes we need to do that. Just kind of just hit record and just see where we go.
Heck yeah.
So whose side are you on? You had one about emoji?
I saw, maybe we'll put a link in the show notes or something, but it was a whole page dedicated to like a standard for using emojis in Git commit messages. So certain emojis meant certain things, were kind of like shorthand for certain things. I thought this was an interesting one for me because, well, first of all, whose side are you on? How do you feel about emojis in commit messages?
I'm not against emoji in commit messages as a gut reaction. The only thing I guess I would worry about is if they're going to display properly on everything for everyone.
Yeah. I have kind of a gut reaction against. I really don't like it, and part of it is that what you said. But then I was thinking about it, I was like, I don't even know if that's rational. Like, how many environments are people looking at a Git login these days that don't support UTF-8 or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
Like, what environment are we talking about in 2024 that can't display an emoji?
It should work, I think, in most terminals and every tool. Okay, so one thing, I remember there was a Tom Scott video about this a long time ago where he was talking about how, you know, different platforms display emoji differently. And typically it's fine, but there can be subtle differences, specifically with like smiley faces and stuff. Like there's somewhere like maybe on Apple, the face is a little bit more snarky, and then like on Samsung it's a little bit more friendly. And so like you know, if this is the way we're going to communicate with each other, there's these little underlying implications that could get lost in kind of lost in translation depending on what platform you're on.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
But do you remember what emoji were used in the thing you saw?
I don't. Let me see if I can find this page real quick.
Because just like where I'm going with that is like, you know, if we're using like fire emoji, that's pretty consistent. You know, like if we're using red dot, green dot, I've seen people use those for, you know, like a good status and a poor status.
So the website I'm looking at here is gitmoji.dev. He or she suggests the art palette to improve structure / format code. There's a lightning bolt for like improve performance. There's a fire emoji for remove code or files. You're burning it down. A little caterpillar to fix a bug.
There's a lot actually. So
yeah.
I mean, yeah, I don't know if these are all consistent. This just like triggered something in my brain. I saw somebody the other day was talking about chart with upwards arrow, or no, chart with upwards trend. That emoji, every form, or at least all the popular forms of that emoji, the line is red, but the chart is going up.
Yes.
Like, why? That's so wrong.
I've never heard anyone comment on that, but I've wondered that same thing. The chart looks bad. The number is going up, but the chart looks
it's an upward trend. Yeah, that's so weird.
That's hilarious. Yes, I've noticed that myself. I guess I thought it was just the Apple one, but
But I mean, some of these I feel like are not into. I probably should share, but I guess we can explain. Like some of these I don't feel are super intuitive. Like heavy plus sign is adding a dependency. Okay, I mean, honestly, why does it even matter?
I just don't really know. I don't know what this helps with. That I don't know that it's really. I mean, I guess the idea is that you can scan through git log more easily and see. I don't know if you're looking for all the dependencies added, you could search for heavy plus sign.
Well, and so some of these are okay. As I look at this, I feel like this isn't supposed to be taken very seriously as a project because, like, so there's poop emoji, write bad code that needs to be improved, and there's beers for write code drunkenly. Like, just don't commit that. Just
Yeah.
don't commit those things. And some
Yeah.
of them are cute. Okay, clown face is for mocking things. That's cute, but it's not intuitive at all.
What kind of oh, I see.
Yeah, see, like it's mock. That's not. I wouldn't think that if I see a clown face.
Yeah. I don't know anything about this project. I don't know the motivation or anything like that, or if it's meant to be taken seriously. Just
Emoji is an emoji guide for GitHub commit messages. Aims to be a standardization cheat sheet guide for using emojis on. See, like, yeah, I think. So, I mean, it sounds like they want this to be like a real thing, which is, I don't know. I think this is cool for like a fun project, but I don't know if this makes sense as like a real standardization technique for commit messages.
I have, yeah, like I said, I kind of have a strong gut reaction against it. I find it a little hard to explain why. I think part of it is for me that emojis, we imbue emojis with meaning, and I almost feel like they're a bit cultural specific, and I think that
Mm-hmm.
the meaning of emoji shifts over time. Like the fire
Oh yeah,
emoji is like these days that's a good thing. You want the fire
yeah,
emoji.
it's fire, yeah.
And that wasn't the case 10 years ago. Then
Yeah,
fire
or
emoji
like
was
the
bad.
fact that like the eggplant emoji, you can't even use it anymore
Right.
unless you're talking about wieners.
Yeah. I think that's part of what bothers me. Like you just don't have that problem with plain text in the same way.
Well, and I think really, I mean, so it's, again, going back to the about page, using emoji on commit messages provides an easy way of identifying the purpose or intention of a commit with only looking at the emojis used. I just feel like, I mean, you can write a description. You can write a paragraph explaining what's in the commit if you want to. So I don't know if this really helps us.
And yeah, and the emoji is almost in addition to the commit message, right? You still have to say which bug you're fixing, even if you put a little caterpillar there.
So my initial reaction to this when you brought it up was that this is a case of you hating fun and me liking fun. But no, yeah, I think this is kind of, I don't really see value in this.
Yeah. I don't want to hate fun. I don't want to be a wet blanket. Wet blanket emoji.
There was something the other day. Oh yeah, I was trying to find like a tip fedora emoji, and there's like not one.
Talking
There's
about
like
like
hat
tip of the
emoji.
hat.
Yeah, I wanted to be like tip fedora. Like I was gonna use it sarcastically, like, oh, like, oh, look at this dork, you know. But like,
Mhm.
there like isn't one.
Really? I thought there was like guy tipping a top hat or something.
Because that's what I thought too. Maybe I was like searching the wrong thing, but I couldn't find this on. I couldn't find it on my iOS device.
Hmm. Lots of hats. I don't see anyone tipping a hat though. That's interesting.
Yeah, that seems wrong.
This feels like some Mandela effect thing because I swear I can see it in my mind, the emoji of the guy tipping the hat.
Right.
Hmm. Did we both just make that up?
Maybe it's on like specific platforms, but not not the one we're looking at. Anyway, did you have some more? Whose side are you on?
What was the other one? Oh, the other one I wanted to talk about was type. I'm not even sure exactly the right word here, but type annotations on the left or right side. So in C, C++, you have, unsigned int X. And then in modern languages, it seems like the trend has been to put the type on the right. So you say X is F32 or whatever. And so I kind of got the impression that that's the way the world was moving, that we were moving towards types on the right. To me, types on the right makes a million times more sense. I think that seems pretty clearly the right choice, and that the world is moving in the right direction. The arc of history bends towards justice. But I saw a debate on Hacker News where this guy was like, no, it makes it much easier to scan down your code, and it's that having the types on the left side makes it easier to read. I was like, I think it's only easier because you've read so much C code, right?
So, yeah, I mean, I've seen that there is some debate about this online. I don't know whose side I'm like. I think I've worked much more in languages that have it on the right side, like the newer way of doing it. So that's what feels good to me.
Hmm.
I don't know if I have any logical justification for one over the other.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't really know that I do either. This feels like it's mostly just preference. I guess to me, it just feels like variable name and then the type of variable it is. Like, because the weird thing about C++, especially, well, C++ is maybe a bad example because it just keeps growing and growing and growing, and like, there's all kinds of stuff. But it just feels like there's all kinds of stuff in the variable type now. It can be a templated type and all this kind of stuff. Those aren't even new features, but it just feels like there's in a lot of cases there's a lot of information in that type, and that makes way more sense to just say, here's the name of the variable, here's a whole description about like what type it is. I think Rust is like that too, where there's a lot of information in the type, right?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Like, you're right. Like writing C, you've got primitive types, right? You've got booleans, you've got integers, you got strings. I think it makes sense like to put it on the left side because language-wise, it makes sense, right? Like this is the integer C, this is the string S, whatever. That makes sense to me. But yeah, if I've got like a like in TypeScript, like a list of string lists of arrays of strings, whatever, like
Yeah.
I don't want all that. Like put that kind of on the side.
Yeah.
That maybe that's what has driven that trend.
I'm sure that's part of it is, yeah, I'm trying to remember the first place I saw, I think was like Scala or whatever. I don't know if you ever played with that one, but they moved the types to the right, if I remember right. And as soon as I saw it, it was like, oh, that feels right. That feels better. I like that better.
Yeah, I've never really even thought about it, but yeah, I think the right side feels good to me.
Yeah.
That's all I know. That's all I can say.
Yeah. That's another one that it just feels like a preference. It doesn't feel like there's really any solid reason. I don't know. Maybe there are readability concerns, but um, Here's another thing though. Even apart from variable declarations and function arguments and stuff like that, having the return type of a function on the right, that makes a lot more sense to me, because like you have your function signature and it's got arguments and all that. The output is on the right, right? So
I'm trying to think of an example of a language where it's on the left.
well, like C functions are on the left, right? You would do int function name and then in parentheses and then each of your function arguments.
Yeah, that's always felt unintuitive to me. I agree. Yeah, it should be what comes out is on the right. That makes sense.
Yes, you've defined your black box and you got your inputs and then you got your outputs. Try and do this in the camera. I think I'm going the wrong way, but yeah, what comes out of the black box is on the right.
Yeah, I'm on that side.
I think those are the two I had.
I don't know. I'm looking at an example now, and like int num looks nicer to me than like let num colon number.
You think for variables you like it on the left?
I don't know if I do, because of what you said, right? With like complex types and stuff. But it looks nice. I'll just say that. It looks clean to me.
Okay.
I wish, I'm curious, like what the arguments were in the original thread that you saw.
See if I can find it here.
I found a thread on Stack Exchange where a guy was saying what's it called? Like, what is the term for the side on which a variable type is given in a language?
Oh.
And there's not one. That's the
Okay.
answer. There's probably not a name for that.
Yeah, I didn't save that thread, unfortunately. All I did, I just made a note about the concept. But it had something to do with readability. It had to do with like being able to scan down, a list of functions, I guess, and see the return type.
Well, okay, I'll say this. It might be a little bit, but if that's an issue for you, you could use Hungarian notation.
Yeah.
Right.
I guess that's true.
Or you should have variable names where the type is somewhat inferable. I don't know. As somebody who writes a lot of Python code, it's like, who cares? What are you guys talking about? But,
yeah.
But I don't know. I think the right probably makes sense. I guess I'll take that. I'll take that side.
This is only occurring to me now, but I feel much more strongly about the function return type being on the right, but it feels totally wrong for some reason to have variable types on the left, but function type on the right. You know what I mean? Like you got to go all in. If you're going to move to the right, move to the right.
Yeah, I think your logic is sound.
Solved. Man, I've been writing some C++ lately.
I never have. Ever, I think.
Gets crazy, some of these types. I mean, there's ways to manage it, but it gets wild.
Yeah, I mean, it's so hairy that they make a new language every week to replace it. So
yeah, that's true.
It must be a little nutty. All right. I think that's all we got today.
Thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you for listening, as always.
See you next time.
1x Developer Podcast.
Hey everybody, this is Colin. First and foremost, I want to thank you all for listening to this episode of the 1x Developer Podcast, and let you know that if you have any questions, comments, or if you just want to tell us about your day, you can reach us at X, formerly known as Twitter, at 1x Developer Podcast. We're also on YouTube at 1x Developer Podcast. You can email us if you're weird at 1xdeveloperpodcast@protonmail.com. And lastly, don't forget to follow, subscribe, all that stuff, so you don't miss any further episodes of the 1x Developer Podcast. Thanks so much. See you next time.
Thank you.